people. So we have David Worth in the house, and he's going to be conducting, well, not necessarily a masterclass. It's more like a live discussion, I would say,
A
and
seminar with you.
seminar. Let's call it that. So independent filmmaking 101 with somebody who has been in the film industry for over 40 years and has more than 40 films under his belt. He's worked with A-list personnel such as Clint Eastwood, Bruce Campbell, Roy Scheider, amongst many others, and he is responsible for single-handedly launching the career of action movie star Jean-Claude Van Damme. And his work ranges from action to romance to sci-fi, horror, a plethora of genres, and he switched to academia later in his career, and he's been my good friend and mentor for the last 4 years. This is David Wood, people.
Hi,
David,
guys.
thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, guys. My pleasure. I was thrilled to meet Akash. We were both getting our master's degrees at Raindance, and he's one of the most talented young filmmakers I've come across. So was thrilled to meet him and to do whatever mentoring he needed at any time. And I'm anxiously looking forward to every film he makes. So I'm thrilled to be here and sharing my time today with everyone online.
Perfect. So, David, if you could, just tell us a little bit about how you got into the film industry, because back then, I think it was the 1960s, it wasn't necessarily as easy getting into an industry that was controlled by studios, I guess. Like, you couldn't really buy off-the-shelf cameras. It was a different ballgame back then. Could you just run through it?
It was an entirely different ballgame. I got into the film business really just because I wouldn't get out of it. I got knocked down so many times trying to get a foothold in Hollywood. I was actually at UCLA in my senior year studying motion pictures, majoring in motion pictures, and I asked someone at the school, one of the professors, is there some kind of a stepping stone or an internship program to help get us into the film industry, because it's very tough? And they said no. Now nowadays, most film schools do have some kind of an internship or stepping stone program. Back in the 1960s, no. So I decided, instead of staying in school and making a 10-minute film for my senior year, I would drop out and start hustling films, and that's exactly what I did. I actually got myself a little 8mm camera and a little viewer, what you used to wind the 8mm film through the viewer, and I studied hours and hours and hours of film, black and white and color, and slowly taught myself the difference between black and white and color, the difference between telephoto and wide angle lenses, the differences between natural light, available light, studio light, etc. And when I got enough confidence, I started hustling little no money projects that eventually had me doing small little, what I call forgettable features, but features that I was hired as a cinematographer and editor on. And I learned my trade that way just by doing. And I refused to leave. I mean, I did so many bad films, and I did so many unmentionable films, and I did so many projects that I just fell on my face. And I would stand up and I would say, you got to kill me to get me out of here. And you have to have that kind of determination, or at least you did back in my day, to just even make a dent, because it was an absolute closed shop. It was a father-to-son industry, and unless you were in the in club, and I was so far out of the in club, I was, I was just a guy from the Midwest who'd come out and gone to college, and I knew nobody. So I was on the out group. I wasn't on the in group, and I just had to pick myself up and determined to make movies. And I would interest other people in trying to make movies. And we made a little independent art film that was shot in 16 millimeter and 35 millimeter called The Bach Train. And we shot that over a period of weekends. I was paid $25 for the weekend to shoot that film, and then went on to edit it, and then supervise the blow up to 35. And then we had various screenings of it. That gave us the ability to have what was interlock screenings back in the day, a separate track of 35 millimeter and a 35 millimeter picture and sound. And we had interlock screenings for the film industry to try to introduce ourselves to the film industry. And we made a little headway. Somebody named John Cassavetes actually came to one of our screenings, and the great cinematographer Conrad Hall came to another screening. And John, actually, the director James Eric, and the sound man on the film, the guy who did the music, Bo Harwood, actually did a lot of films with Mr. Cassavetes, working on his crew. I wasn't that fortunate because John was looking for people who would volunteer to work for him, and I was working as a professional. And but Mr. Connie Hall told me to keep on keeping on, and I kept on keeping on. And I did, film after film after film after film, and eventually I got really lucky when a friend of mine, a producer named Larry Spiegel, who I had met along the way, called and asked me to take over the cinematography on a film that they were shooting. They'd been shooting for a week, and the director had just fired the cinematographer, and they asked me to take over. So again, I didn't even go looking for the job. It came to me. It fell out of the sky. It was what I like to call a gift from the gods of production. And I was reluctant because the film was in chaos, but when I found out that the cast, it was Sandra Locke, who'd gotten an Academy Award nomination for Horace and Lonely Hunter, and Seymour Cassell, who'd gotten an Academy nomination for Faces. So I signed on, and we did the film. I was able to capture 150,000 feet of anamorphic Panavision in 13 days at a house in Hancock Park in Hollywood. And then, everyone went their separate ways. And about 3 months later, the director asked Sandra and I to have a look at the film because they had a first cut. And it was one of the worst things I'd ever seen in my life. Sandra was literally in the screening like this because she had gone from that film to outlaw Josie Wales and began what would be a 15-year relationship with Clint Eastwood. And I'm saying all during the film, I'm saying, where's this shot? Where's that shot? Where's this shot? Where's that shot? So after the film, we took the work print, and I had the director take us back to the editing room, and I was able to look at the editing table and find certain scenes that were missing and showed him exactly how to fix certain scenes. And from that point on, the editor was fired, and I was the cinematographer and editor. That was one of my big breaks.
Sorry to interrupt. So was this the movie called Death Game, or was it before Death Game?
This was Death Game. This was Death Game. This was the film that became Death Game. It was called Mrs. Manning's Weekend when we shot it, but it was the film that became Death Game, and this was a huge turning point in my life.
I think. Sorry, so for the audience who doesn't really know about it, I think Death Game was remade in 2015, if I'm not mistaken, as Knock Knock.
Yes, it was remade. Keanu Reeves, and I love Keanu's work, but Knock Knock was not as good as the original. Let me just put it that way.
Nothing's as good as the original.
Yeah, but that film was a huge turning point in my life because it brought me, with no preconception on my part, it brought me into contact with Sandra Locke, who liked my work as a cinematographer because I had brought out her skin tone. She's almost translucent. She's very white. And I decided to underexpose the film a little over half a stop because it was kind of a scary, horrific film. And that alone had her on my team because she could see on screen her look, which was more than she had gotten in other films. And then when I went on to edit the film, that also got her attention because she saw how bad the screening was, and she wanted to make sure it came out professional, and I was able to do that. So that was a big turning point in my life. And over the next few years, I always called Sandra and complimented her on her work and checked and see how she was doing. And after I saw the film The Gauntlet with she and Clint, great action film. Clint and Sandra are like 50-50 on the screen. He's taking her to be a witness against the mob, and the mob is trying to kill them all. It's a great little action film. And I called her and said, what a great job you did 50-50 with the big guy. You know, I was so proud of you. And she thanked me. And then she said, you know, we had a great time doing the film, but Clint had a big fight with his DP because he wouldn't shoot by campfire light.
Mm-hmm.
I said, what? You're kidding me? Because I did a whole off-road motorcycle film with campfire light and lantern light. And she said, then she said something, asked me a question that was going to change my life forever. She said, you wouldn't have a reel of that film, would you, to drop off to show Clint? Now, this is the entree of entrees. I didn't have one, but I told her, sure, no problem. So I ran to the edit room, put together a reel of 10-minute highlights of the campfire dialogue scenes and the love in the hot springs lantern scenes and motorcycle chase scenes, and dropped it off. And Clint saw it, and he showed it to Don Siegel. And I had actually Don Siegel and Clint Eastwood both asking the union if I could come on to Escape from Alcatraz. The union's answer was no. Now, this show you how hard it was back in the day. I had Clint Eastwood and Don Siegel shoulder to shoulder in the middle of Tinseltown asking to bring me onto a film, but because I hadn't been a loader for 5 years, and second assistant for 5 years, a first assistant for 5 years, an operator for 5 years, and then made my way into being a director of photography, I was just a DP. I was not allowed. So I was pretty depressed by that because I figured as I recall, I was sitting at home in my apartment in North Hollywood, polishing off a bottle of vodka. And Sandra called and said, don't worry, Clint really likes you and he wants to work with you and he doesn't like to be told no. So I had to just keep on. I had to pick myself up again, dust myself off again, and say they got to kill me to get me out of here, and keep making movies. And I kept on keeping on. And about 5 years later, another few sets of circumstances enabled me to get the script for Bronco Billy, and off we went.
That's crazy. So I mean, back in the day, it just goes to show that it never was really easy, and independent filmmaking, although it did exist, it wasn't really as prolific as it is now, and that it's not as easy as easy to get into the industry or create content for that matter. And I guess when it comes to indie filmmaking, everything starts with a story, not just indie filmmaking, but even commercial films. Everything starts with a story. And the thing with independent filmmakers is that they are limited when it comes to resources. So if you really want to shoot something that's crazy wild out there, like a car chase sequence, which you probably have to shut down the road for or stage some sort of an explosion, it's definitely going to be tough for you. But then again, I think it matters how you tell the story, right? So
absolutely.
What advice would you give to an independent filmmaker who has a very limited amount of resources? How would they structure their story? How would they frame it? How would they execute everything starting from the screenplay stage?
Well, first you need to follow the example of the brilliant Robert Rodriguez. This is the independent filmmaker of independent filmmakers. When he wanted to do a film, he thought he could do a film when he was in Austin, Texas, back in the 1990s. And he wanted to just do a film that would play on local television on some of the Spanish language stations. And he took a He did a medical test where he was making $100 a day for 30 days to get money to make the movie. And while he was there,
Mm-hmm.
he created what has been called the Rodriguez list. He made a list of everything he could get for free: a camera, a bus, a jail, a town, etc., etc., etc. And he wrote his script around that list so he wouldn't have to spend any money. He was so brilliantly frugal, he realized that if he shut things down, he would have to say, roll sound, roll picture, mark it, scene 23, take 2. That would take up too much film. So he shot the film silent and just allowed himself one take per shot. And after he got the take on camera, he would have the actors do the exact same scene back vocally for a little sound recorder, hand sound recorder, and he later transferred that and put it suck it up in post-production. That's how frugal he was. That film cost him under $7,000, but he said 90% of it was for film stock, processing, printing, and telecine. He said, without that, I could have made the film for $600. So that's what you need to do. You need to just start very, very simply. Another great example of a template for simple filmmaking is from Mike Figgis. Mike Figgis was a musician and a director. He's done big films. He's also done a very small film called Time Code. This is not a good film, but it's a great example of how to make an independent film. He made a film. What was his shooting schedule for Time Code? 1 day, and not just 1 day, 90 minutes. He shot the entire film on video with video cameras in one 90-minute take. This is a brilliant film. You should look. This is a brilliant template for how to make an independent film. The film didn't turn out great, but the template for making it is great. So I would suggest looking at Time Code. Get Time Code if you can, and look at the making of. He has a director's video diary, the making of. It's a brilliant template for making films. Now another guy who had a great template for making films is the originator of the independent film template, which is Vittorio De Sica. Back in 1945, the Italian neorealists started the template for independent filmmaking. It had been around since D.W. Griffith, of course. People had been using it, but it didn't really get organized until the Italian neorealists. And they began because they were all studio filmmakers in the early 1940s. After the war, Italy was destroyed. The studios were destroyed. There was 25% unemployment. They needed to make films, so they just got into the streets and did it. Or as Clint used to say, don't overthink it, just do it. They got into the street and did it. And they used natural locations and available light and non-actors and very little money and inexpensive equipment and organic episodic stories. Every independent film that has been successful since then has used that template. The French New Wave followed 10 years later in the late 50s and used that template, but added handheld cameras. And so they could even get into the streets more and quicker and they could, Jean-Luc Godard could push his cinematographer around in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
John Cassavetes was a young actor in New York back in the 1950s and actor studio trained, and he was teaching a workshop to young actors. And he had gone to the movies and he had seen the Italian neorealist films. And at some point he said to himself, wait a minute, I have these young actors doing great improvisations in my acting class. That can be the script. I can rent a 16mm camera, use the streets of New York and make a movie. And he did. And it was called Shadows. And it was not a good movie. But it was good enough to go to the Venice Film Festival and win and have him acclaimed as the grandfather, the godfather of independent filmmaking in America. So there's all different ways. And when Marty Scorsese saw that film, he said, there's no more excuses. If John can make this film with his actor studio as acting class in the streets of New York, we can all do it. Now, again, this is back in the days when it had to be film and it had to be processing. Now, that's all been wiped off the table. Now what you have is high-def cameras. How many of you seen it? If you haven't seen the film Tangerine, you need to all go out and rent the film Tangerine or find it on Netflix or stream it online on YouTube. Tangerine, for me, is the most revolutionary film since the Italian neorealists did Bicycle Thief, since the French New Wave did Breathless, since John Cassavetes did Faces, did Shadows. Because the writer and director, Sean Baker, and his writing partner, lived near Santa Monica and Highland, which is the transgender sex worker community. They were intrigued by these people. They walked into the community, started asking questions, started talking to them. And in that process, they found, by just talking to some of the individuals, they found the two non-actors who would star in the movie. And the non-actors told them an urban legend that would become the story for the movie. And Sean had made a handful of independent films, but he'd run out of favors. So he couldn't get free film. He couldn't get free equipment anymore. So what did Sean do? Sean took out his iPhone and said, I'm going to make this film on iPhones. He made the film. He captured the film in 2.5 weeks over the Christmas holidays on 2 iPhone 5s. Back in 2015 or so. This is a revolutionary film. Again, using exactly the same template, but now you don't need a truck full of equipment and lights because you have high def. He is,
and I think we've seen even more prominent filmmakers like Steven Soderbergh just jumping on the bandwagon.
Yes. Steven Soderbergh. Yeah, Steven Soderbergh was one of the first major filmmakers to shoot on home video back in the day. He did a film on the Canon XL1 back in the 90s, and then he jumped as soon as he saw that iPhones were being used. He did a film, I think it's called Unsane, on his iPhone 5.
Unsane, yeah.
Phenomenal, yeah. It's total freedom. What has happened is the technology has totally democratized filmmaking. Back in my day, it would take me thousands of dollars and months to do a promo film for myself because I had to have trucks full of equipment. I had to have film and processing and printing and all of those things. Now all you need to do is take out your iPhone and have the will and go make the movie. Get some wireless mics. You can put everything you need to make a movie, your computer, your laptop computer, a couple of GoPros, a couple of iPhones, and some wireless mics in a backpack and literally go anywhere on the planet once the pandemic is over and make a movie.
Exactly. So it's just like you have a walking studio in your pocket. That's something that I tell my students when it comes to mobile phones, because they've just revolutionized the entire film industry, because everyone has the capability to become a content creator or a filmmaker. It just matters how you tell your story. So like
there are
Andrew in the chat, there's no more excuse for not making movies.
Absolutely. I mean, there are literally millions of content creators going on giving beauty tips, giving martial arts tips, doing exercise shows, doing cooking shows. Whatever you want to do, you can do. Just like we're having a seminar this morning. There's Zoom, there's Instagram, there's all these things available, and there's a friend of mine who started doing a little feature film. He contacted me. He's a martial artist, and he contacted me from France years ago. And he got a home video camera, went in the streets with a few friends, and started making a little webinar show. And he brought it to the States after a couple of years. He shot it in San Diego. He had Eric Roberts in it. He won awards.
Eric Roberts.
Yeah, so he started just in the streets of Paris. I remember watching him do his little workout training videos and all that, and then the little webinar feature, and he was able to grow this, and he's now making steps to do a feature film. So again, there are a million stories like this of people who you just have to have the passion to do it, and the will to do it, and the determination to do it. And you can do it, but you have to stick to it. You are not going to make it the first time, unless you're very lucky.
100% here. So what would you say, you know, when it comes to, again, indie filmmaking, you had to do so many things on your own. Like, you have to basically juggle multiple roles on set, and even before the cameras roll. So when it comes to the pre-production stage, which I think we've discussed, you and I, that it's, you know, the most important stage, no matter, you know, what you're shooting on, whatever it is, what the story is, it's just about how much you prepare for a shoot. So what do you know, what advice would you give an independent filmmaker about preparing for a shoot? What would you do in pre-production?
Well, if you're failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. It's just that simple. You have to prep. You have to prep. Absolutely. You have to be meticulous about it. Now, every phase of film is important because it's important when you're shooting to get the performances. You don't have the performances, you don't have a movie. It's important in post-production to make a professional presentation. If you don't have presentations, you don't have a movie. But let's go back to pre-production. First of all, you need a great script. And I need a drink of espresso. Excuse me. So, whatever, the hardest job in show business is sitting in front of the blank page or the blank screen and typing fade in. What comes after that? Until you have 90 or 100 or 120 pages of perfect action dialogue, you don't have anything. Now, a lot of films have been made on outlines, on improvisations, etc. But if you're just practicing to make a film with your friends in your backyard, that's fine to do. You need to try to find a great script. If you find someone who's a good script writer, if you're not a writer, if you find someone who really is them an apartment, take care of them, put them on the payroll, do anything to keep them in your camp because you need a great script. If you don't have a great script, but you still have the wherewithal to move forward, then the next step is to very carefully cast. Look for the next star. Look for the next, as far as female and male leads. Look for people who that have a charisma, that have a style. Try to find the next James Dean or the next Marlon Brando or the next Bridget Fonda, etc., etc. Also, you need to cast your crew as carefully as you cast your cast. I've seen films where the crew, where the cinematographer is there to do something for his reel. You don't want a cinematographer who's there to do something for his reel because he may take 2 hours to light something that you could do in 10 minutes. You want to make sure everyone's on the same page. Everyone is vision they're there to uphold. That's the important thing. Then you need to scout locations. You need to find locations, and you have to do that. You have to find practical locations that you can use with available or practical light, so you don't have to worry about doing any lighting at all. A guy named Ken Burns, not Ken Burns, not Ken Burns. He did a feature film. He did a feature film called The Brothers McMillan back in the '90s, and then after he worked with Steven Spielberg on Saving Private Ryan, he saw he was shooting in available light and practical light, and he said, "If it's good enough for Mr. Spielberg, it's good enough for me." So he made a little film about 10 years ago. Just with his friends, actor friends in New York. He shot it on weekends, and it didn't even cost him $9,000 to complete the film, and it closed the Tribeca Film Festival back in like 1910 or 1911. It can be done.
So what essentially what you're trying to say is it's so important to assemble the right people when it comes to pre-production itself, because these are the people who are going to see the project through to completion. Yeah,
and you could and don't get lost in the fact that you need to have an Alexa camera or you need to have lots of people or lots of support. Try to do it as simply as possible. This little film that he made in New York, the name is slipping my mind right now, but it was like a Woody Allen film, but not from a Jewish point of view, from a Irish Catholic point of view, and it was just characters. It was a very sweet little film, and he shot it with a crew of 3 people. He was the director and star. He had a sound man putting wireless mics on the actors. And he had someone, a camera operator, operating his DSLR. That he made an entire feature that closed the Tribeca Film Festival in that way. There's no more better example than something like that. You don't need to beat a dead horse to make a good movie. Start making them so that you can make mistakes and learn from your mistakes and make a bigger film next time.
David, I think you just cut off there for a moment. There was some technical issue, so could you?
Yeah, I noticed that you freeze up a few times.
Yeah.
Did I cover pre-production enough on pre-production? Just make sure you have all the elements in place. Test your equipment, test your sound, etc.
I think I'm the person who just didn't hear what you said, at the very end. But if everyone else kind of got it, I think we can kind of move on. But yeah, so essentially, just to recap, it's about not worrying what kind of equipment you have. It's about just going out there and doing it. I mean, when it comes to pre-production, try to prepare as much as you can, visualize, storyboard, shot lists, create all that stuff, and then just go out there and do it without worrying too much.
And I'm sure that most of the young people who are tuning in have seen Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity. Those are 2 films that were made with nothing. One was 8 days of production, one was 7 days of production. But what did they have? They were compelling. You couldn't turn away. You don't have to have a lot of money if you have a concept that's compelling. You just have to do it. Blair Witch Project was shot entirely by the actors. That's why it looks like this. It didn't matter. It was compelling.
Exactly. So you got to figure out the story, the concept, and figure out a way to execute it in a way that,
execute it for no money. You've got to do it for no money. Be like Robert Rodriguez. Do it with no money.
Perfect. Yeah. So I think next question is more about cinematography and lighting, which happens to be your specialty, which is, you've been cinematographer on so many films. And I remember you telling me that there was this one movie that influenced your cinematography and mostly the lighting. So I think you should probably talk a little bit about that and also focus on why lighting a set efficiently is very important when it comes to an indie film.
It's the most important because it saves you, it's actor friendly and it's production friendly. Now, I have to double back now to the film I did with Sandra Locke and Seymour Cassell called Death Game, because when I was editing that film, I got another blessing from the gods of production. I was building my soundtracks and I needed fill leader, which was old 35 millimeter prints of film that you get from the lab to put between the actor's performance to keep everything in sync. You had to put each actor on a separate 1,000-foot reel so the sound man could set their levels. So I call MGM Lab and I ask for another box of fill leader, and I go in to the editing room on Saturday to do this tedious work when nobody's around. I open up the box of fill leader, it's there for me. What had the gods of production sent me? Out of 1 billion old movies, I got a 35 millimeter print of Clockwork Orange. Stanley Kubrick, Clockwork Orange. This had been my favorite film for nearly 10 years. In fact, I have ticket number 001 I was first in line when it opened on Hollywood Boulevard. I bought ticket number 002 to go in so I could keep number 001 in my archives. I've still got it. I loved this film. For the first time I saw it multiple times, but I could never study it because it was a screening and the projectionist was not going to go back and show me my favorite parts of the film again. So when I opened this box of Phil Leader and I discovered I had Clockwork Orange, I went, oh my God. I took all my work off the old 35 millimeter upright moviola. I put Mr. Kubrick's work on it and I began to study the film, scene by scene, right from the first scene in the Crow of a Milk Bar on and on and on. And I could see, gee, he's using very simple lighting. I just see 150 watt bulbs. I was just watching the movie. I got to the scene where little Alex kills the cat lady with the sculpture of the giant phallus. And as I get to the end of that film, I hit the brake on the movie and I go, what the F? What? I won it back and wind it and look at it again. And I said, wait a minute. I can see he's shooting this handheld with his Arri 2C. He's got it on an 18 or a 16 or a 14 millimeter lens. He's going 360 degree, panning the actors around the room. I can see all four walls, the floor and the ceiling. There are no movie lights. This blew my mind as a young cinematographer, editor, and filmmaker. This blew my mind. This was no student film. This was no Roger Corman film. This was a Stanley Kubrick production of A Clockwork Orange that had been distributed by Warner Brothers that was nominated for 4 Academy Awards. And I started freezing the frame of the moviola where all the lights were, and I could see he had one light. He designed 6 lighting units to bring in. One was in a spiral, one was shaped like a Christmas tree, others were in bunches, and he plugged them into the wall sockets and said, we're lit, let's shoot. This was an epiphany of epiphanies for me as a young filmmaker, as a young cinematographer. I immediately swept key light, kick light, and fill light off the table and said, I'm not doing that, I'm doing this. This is the most actor-friendly because no actor has to hit their mark and go, well, now I'm in my light, I can say my line. The whole room, the whole location is their light. It frees the actor and it simplifies the production, because if instead of the old way was to shoot everything in this direction, then when the director wants to look in that direction, the cinematographer said, well, give me 2 hours. I've seen him do this. Give me 2 hours to relight. Somebody said that to Mr. Kubrick, and he told them where to shove it, because he built all of his lights into the sets and location and could capture everything when he was ready. This blew my mind, and this is what I brought to my first Clint Eastwood film, Bronco Billy. I brought this technique to that film. I built all the lights into the circus tent. I built them into hotel rooms. I built them into bars. I would hang 150 watt bulbs around, and Clint would come in. He'd say, I want to shoot a master and a couple of close-ups and maybe a reverse master. I'd say, ready. Now look, Clint Eastwood is one of the most prepared and efficient and fastest directors on the planet. And he always came in a couple of days under schedule. On Bronco Billy, he didn't come in a couple of days. He didn't come in a week. He came in 2.5 weeks under schedule. That's why he said, why don't you hang around? We're going to start another one up in about a month. And I got to do Any Which Way You Can also. So yeah, that film, again, Death Game, was a huge film for me, both as a cinematographer and an editor and as a studier of it's like I had Stanley Kubrick and John Alcott standing over my shoulder, showing me what they had done in this remarkable film, A Clockwork Orange. And this is 1970. This is 1970 when he's shooting with practical lights.
Back then. So how do you think independent filmmakers could do that today?
You just do it. This is exactly, run the film by, run the film by, who's the director who did Gravity?
Sorry, I didn't catch you there.
Who's the director who did Gravity?
Gravity was this guy, right? Alfonso Cuarón.
Alfonso Cuarón, thank you. Alfonso Cuarón's first film with Emmanuel Lubitsky, Y tu mama tambien, was shot with practical light, 35 millimeter camera, all in handheld one-shot takes. Now, a few years later, they graduated into doing The Children of Men. Same thing. Same thing, 35 millimeter handheld one-shot takes with practical or available light all through that film. Now, you don't need any lighting anymore. You just don't need it. They weren't even using it with film. Now you have HD, which if you want to Google what HD is capable of, Google a little 5-minute film called Now I See online, in which they're doing tests showing what the Sony A7S is capable of on Brighton Beach at night, is turning pitch black night into magic hour, into perfectly seeable magic hour. You do not need anything but a DSLR, shoot at 25,000 ISO and do it. Nobody cares if there's some grain. Blair Witch looked like this. Give me a break. So anyway, that's the film that changed my life as a cinematographer and filmmaker, and enabled me years later to bring in Bronco Billy in 2.5 weeks under schedule, enabled me to do 70 to 93 setups a day in the Kumite for Bloodsport, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and action films have made up like a massive chunk of your portfolio. And something you're a champion of handheld camera as well. And as independent filmmakers, most of them, they prefer to move the camera around, which is amazing. Like, it gives rise to these dynamic frames. And I think, if there's anything that you could tell the audience watching about camera movement and, however you move it, whether it's handheld or tripod, dolly, whatever, what advice would you give them?
Well, it has to, first of all, it has to serve kind of a function. It has to serve a function of following the vision of the director. If you're just a DP, you just can't start moving the camera. It has to be a meeting of the minds between the DP and the director. But yeah, there's so many ways to move the camera now, and the cameras are so light and portable. Especially if you're using a DSLR, or if you're using an iPhone, you can actually get. Sean Baker and his cinematographer used little steady cams on their iPhones that would just fit in the palm of their hand when they did Tangerine. But yeah. You can move it any way you want to. If you want to learn how to move the camera, Google the best GoPros for the year, and look where people are putting those cameras under skateboards, on dirt bikes, on skis, in motorboats, under the water, doing hang gliding, jumping off bridges. There's no place you can't move it now. I mean, the GoPro. By the way, if you want to see a great film about action and how to shoot action and how to shoot camera movement, pardon my language, but play the music video, Bad Motherfucker.
Yeah.
Google the music video, Bad Motherfucker. It's all done by a stunt team in the Ukraine that just have a GoPro mounted here on the stuntman, and look at that POV. It spawned the movie Hardcore Henry. But yes, this I play it over and over again. I'm stunned by it because it's just natural locations, available and practical light, and a stunt team that knows how to kick ass, and it's a great little music video. I mean, literally, you can do anything you want to do if you have the will to do it nowadays, because the technology fits in the palm of your hand. Back in the day, the Technicolor camera, the 3-strip Technicolor camera in the 1930s that they had to use for Somewhere Over the Rainbow, for that movie, was the size of a refrigerator. because it had 3,000-foot reels of film going through it for each 10-minute magazine. It was longer to reload it than it was to shoot the 10 minutes of film. It was a huge problem. Nowadays, you just do anything you want. You have a GoPro in your hand. I've even seen them mount a GoPro on a pelican's beak.
My next question comes onto, again, the production side of things. So you work with someone like Clint Eastwood. Like, this is somebody who has actually won Academy Awards as well. And you basically, as a DOP, there were certain places where I'm pretty sure you've given him directions as well. So how could indie filmmakers, elicit like believable performances from non-actors? Because most of the time you're going to probably cast your friends. So do you have any advice for that specific purpose?
Yeah. A great example of getting performances from non-actors is what John Carney did for his little film Once. Do you remember the film Once? It won the Academy Award for Best Song back in 2007, 2008, something like that. It was done for $160,000 over the Christmas holiday on home digital in Ireland with 2 non-actors. What did he do? Since it was digital, he would start his actors a block away from each other with wireless mics. He'd roll camera and give them action. They'd had to walk down the street, pass people, bump into people before they ever met each other up to begin the scene. So it was so natural. You use long lenses, you shoot more than you need, and you stay away from the actors so they don't ever feel the crew and the equipment around them. And you rehearse your scene before so they know what they're doing, and then you put them in natural locations and let them go out and you capture it. That's a great way of doing it. That's a great way of doing that, using non-actors. I admire it very much. That's a good use of using telephoto lenses because you're so far away from them, they're just acting natural when they meet up and do the scene.
That's crazy, and I see exactly what you mean, because sometimes just the presence of a crew around you can be daunting.
Yes.
So, it's easier to edit nowadays because of non-linear technology as well. And back in the day, you used to edit all the reels. And me personally, I've never experienced editing on tape or anything as such. But you witnessed that evolution as well. Would you like to just talk about the post-production process, like how easy it is, when it comes to indie filmmaking in the 21st century?
I learned to hate film during post-production.
And why is that?
Because I used to have to carry 10 reels of 35 millimeter picture, 10 reels of 35 millimeter sound, 10 reels of 35 millimeter music up to the projection booth to have a screening for a producer or a distributor or someone like that. And then they'd always say, why is it scratched? Why is it faded? What are all those lines, etc.? Because it's been in the editing room for 6 months. It's had coffee spilled on it. It's gone through the moviola and the projector 50 times. Film does not hold up well. Steven Soderbergh says, that's the reason I went to high def. High def never shows age. I was one of the first people. When I saw nonlinear come in, I immediately embraced it because I saw that I could sit a producer or distributor down in front of a wall-size TV 2 weeks after I'd finished shooting and show them temp titles, temp color correction, temp dissolves, temp freeze frames, and the entire film pristine. Why would I want to go back to 35 millimeter work print with all that mess? I embraced it immediately. I loved it. And that was one of the reasons why I was looking for high def to come in, because I said, well, if post-production is leading the way, it won't be that many more years before we have film leading the way. And sure enough, around the turn of the century, people started doing things on tape and on high def, and film got pushed on the back burner. Kodak even went bankrupt for a while until the studios rescued them and promised to use them on their films. So that's fine. People can shoot film if they want to. I handled so much of it. I don't prefer that way. I prefer the new way. I prefer a high def, and I prefer nonlinear because no, it's just so much simpler and so much more. And you can make it look like anything because it's a digital capture. You can make it look like 16 or 35 or 8 millimeter. You can add any kind of grain you want. You can scratch it, make it look like a documentary if you want, whatever. But the
Yeah.
ease of handling and the ease of screening and the ease of getting a job done, especially for independent filmmakers, is priceless. There are studios that still have buildings and floors of buildings to do what you have on your iPhone.
Yeah. And when it comes to, all these non-linear editing programs, they've gone from software like, but yeah, so we were talking about, non-linear editing and like how it's changed the game, made life very easier for indie filmmakers. And I was just saying, programs like Premiere Pro, Final Cut, they've been compressed from their PC versions to mobile apps as well, where you can just edit stuff on your phone. And
Yes.
this again, I mean, yeah. So I think it just facilitates shooting and editing everything within the same device as well, because you can just shoot everything on your phone, whatever it is, and just start editing it then and there. So it just streamlines
yes,
the whole thing.
you can actually, I think my grandchildren have done this. My grandchildren are already filmmakers of the future. Finn and Boy, hi Finn and Boy, I love you. They're shooting on their iPhone, editing on their iPhone, adding titles and music on their iPhone and posting it. Duh. That's what's available. Make movies. Make art. It's just there. It's there for you to do it. I mean, there used to be garage bands. Now they're garage filmmakers because you can. It's the equipment, the technology is there, so use it and do it.
With all these streaming platforms coming up, how do you think independent filmmakers can benefit? Because the way I see it, there's no better time to be a creator or a filmmaker because you have everything that's out there. And no matter, you create a film, you got to have some sort of a platform to showcase it on. What do you think about all these streaming platforms that are coming up? Because Netflix is there and Disney, all the major studios are trying to copy Netflix and create their own platforms. So how do you think this is going to benefit indie filmmakers?
Well, indie filmmakers have the entire internet. They can do a web series. Like I said, my friend, the young filmmaker from France, started with a web series, and now he's built it into a feature. I see stories all the time of people who started out doing running around with a couple of HD cameras doing a web series, and then it got picked up by HBO.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely use whatever is at your disposal. Just like the Italian neorealists, get into the streets, use whatever you can get your hands on to make a movie. If it's a series turn it into a web series, fine. I think
Sure.
it's great that you have all these venues too, because it helps get you out there. It's the difficult part now is there is so much content. It's an embarrassment of riches, and you have trouble getting through the noise.
Definitely. So I think that's pretty much, we've covered quite a lot from the pre-production stage to post as well. And I think the audience has a few questions as well. But yeah, David.
I see that somebody's asked a question about VR is upcoming.
Let me just address it to
Sure.
the audience. Guys, if you have any questions that you want to pose to David, you can drop them in the comment section down below. And because the Q&A section is coming up next.
Yeah, so I see Nick ask about VR. How do you think this will affect cinema and cinematography? I'm not sure. I'm just not sure because I don't think it's going to affect cinema. I think games are fantastic for VR because you can have action coming at you from all around. You can have the bad guys coming at you from every direction. In cinema, the whole point of the cinema is to make people look there and then there and then there to tell your story. And you don't have that with VR. You have the whole you have the whole 360 degrees. I don't think it's going to make as much of an impact on cinema as it will on gameplay. That's just my opinion.
There's one more question down below. Andrew says a lot of filmmakers now may tend to make stories and films about the pandemic and things that surround it. What's your idea on making films on that?
Well, I think you basically make films about whatever you have in front of you. You can do fantasy, you can do, or there's two areas of filmmaking. There's fantasy and nonfiction. You invent something, invent a story. Then it can be about anything, anytime, any place. Or you do documentary. You do things like what's happening in the streets. And there's a lot of nasty things happening in the streets nowadays, from riots to pandemics. And that's certainly fodder for filmmaking too. Back in the day, when they were doing the Max Sennett comedies, if they were out shooting a comedy and a fire truck would by, they'd chase the fire truck to get some footage. So yeah, whatever is there, if you can weave a story around it, use it.
When it comes to the pandemic itself, how do you think that's going to change the game for independent filmmakers? Because now you can't really go outside and do your guerrilla stuff. You're basically limited indoors. How can they navigate this limitation?
Well, you can't really navigate it right now unless you do a film that's all in your basement and upstairs and downstairs. You can do that. There's been a lot of movies made in the house. You can also, a lot of people have your front yards and backyards that they can use for exteriors. Or maybe you have even access to, you can go out into nature and not around other people, go to the forest or the woods or something like that. If you have that, you can do a lot. But I don't know. I think you should be very careful about bouncing back too fast. If you look at history, you should really study history so you don't have to repeat it. When they had the Spanish flu back in 2018, 1920, whatever that was, the summer hit and the hot weather hit and the flu subsided, so everyone got bold and went out and didn't protect themselves. It came back in the fall and winter and killed 10 million people. So I would be careful myself. I would be careful about venturing out too quickly. I would, and throwing away the masks and gloves. I would just be careful, stay clean, stay careful, keep your mask and your gloves on, don't enter contact, etc.
Also, one more question. I think this is a really good one. If you've written, a feature-length screenplay, and you don't necessarily have the resources to go out and create something which is like a few hours long, what about compressing that and creating a proof of concept short film in order to acquire the funding or whatever that you need for
the
bigger
that's
feature?
good. Yeah, that's a good idea. That's what you can do, and you can put that on these sites that help raise money. What are you do? There's a half a dozen of those sites. GoFundMe or I Fund You or whatever it is. Go Fund Yourself, whatever it is. There's a lot of those sites. Put a proof of concept up there and start getting interest. Gaining interest online is a way to succeed. Yes.
100%. Yeah.
I was using you as an example of doing proof of concept work because your short films have gotten you a lot of traction.
Oh, me. Yeah, well, I kind of got the idea from you as well back, I think it was 4 years back, when I wanted to make the feature. You told me try to create a short instead, and I haven't really looked back since. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, David.
My
really
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys for joining, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session. All right, take care, David.
Ciao. Thank you. Peace and love.